Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking back up again with a one-shot from the Avengers comics from Jason Aaron. This is the, I guess, kind of like the prologue is what it's called, from Enter the Phoenix. Enter the Phoenix is the current ongoing story in Avengers right now. We're just not covering or waiting until it's done, and then we'll cover the whole thing. But this is kind of intriguing. And the reason why is because I don't really know how I feel about this kind of change that's being introduced here. And really, I'm not even really sure how I feel about the whole idea of the Phoenix. And I'll explain why here in a minute. But the important thing about this is that this initially picks up with the woman who would become the first host of the Phoenix Force on Earth 1 million years ago, basically kind of like in this kind of fire pit, right? Not necessarily a pit that's actually like on fire, but like the burnt place is what she calls it. And the idea behind this is that like a lot of early tribes and a lot of early history in humanity, because humanity in its early days was basically stupid, whenever you had beings that looked different or seemed different, they would abandon them there. In this instance, this little girl was abandoned in this place because she had red hair, and presumably they considered it an ill omen, and the result was that they just kind of left her in this location. Of course, again, kind of only something that a stupid person would really do. But the idea is that you have these kind of vultures that seemingly show up with the intention of consuming her, and then of course wolves show up and then basically save her. Following that, she's actually raised by wolves. Quite literally, she's raised by wolves. She's a feral human being. But it's kind of cool, right? While she's with wolves, she learns to hunt, she learns to track, she learns all these important things on how to survive out there in the wilderness and to do what she needs to do in order to make it. But every so often, she would return back to the burnt place to try to save individuals she could if there were people who were left there or something along those lines. And in one instance where she stumbled across a baby that was there, she threw a rock at one of the vultures, chased him away, only for us to realize it's basically a Cyclops is here. Now in that moment, she kind of receives this telepathic message from a being that tells her like, don't be afraid, and then kind of escorts her back to effectively a safe place. Now this individual is never actually given, never really given a name here. Instead, he's very much presented to us as a kind of Charles Xavier-esque character, right? This guy who basically, kind of existed, 1 million years ago when mutants were first starting to pop up. And then the result was that he kind of grabbed them and then took them, brought them to this location, and just kind of helped them to learn how to harness and use their powers. Now, this is where things are changing a lot over the course of Marvel Comics, really with Jason Aaron and the Avengers, specifically with the idea of mutants. And the reason why is because whenever you go through the history of the mutant population in Marvel Comics, what you have here is you have a woman by the name of Selene. And Selene was born about 10,000 years, really about 17,000 years ago during the Hyborian Age, and is by and large considered to be the first mutant to exist, which is to say a person who had a gene that activated and then in turn gave her powers. Now the idea is that with Selene, she's technically an external, basically meaning that she has to, she's essentially immortal. But the important thing to understand is that in Marvel, whether you look at Selene, you look at proto-mutants, so people like Gabriel Shepard, whatever the case is, mutants did not exist before 10,000 years ago. There are things like the Seraphim and Chiaraphim, but they're largely considered to be extra-dimensional beings, right? I guess they're kind of mutants, but not really. But traditional mutants, which is to say somebody whose gene manifests when they become a teenager, whether through stress or through puberty, they didn't exist before 10,000 years ago. This is Jason Aaron kind of making it up and saying, actually they did. But the idea here is that with her being in this location, it basically gives her the ability to live among her own kind, right? People who have powers. Now, we're not explicitly told this girl has powers, but this really seems to come into play when she starts getting these headaches. Now, at 10 years old, this is when her body starts changing. And that's usually around the time when mutant powers will slowly begin to kind of manifest, right? Where the mutant gene will activate somewhere in that time period, usually between the ages of like 10, 11, all the way up to like 14 or 15 years old, right? During that point when the body begins to change, that's when the mutant gene begins to activate. And so with that being the case, basically she ends up developing telepathy. But this telepathy comes by way of her not really understanding what it is, but only picking up on the emotional, I guess the emotional state of individuals who were coming for them with the intention of killing them. Now, the people who are coming for them are the ones who are basically leaving babies in that burnt place, right? Like just leaving them in that location because they were too strange, they were too different, that kind of a thing. And that's kind of what's going on here, right? They discover that there's this group here that's just different and they just kind of want to kill them, right? So basically the 1 million year ago version of what's going on right now in Marvel Comics with regards to the mutant population, right? So basically humans have been hunting mutants for at least 1 million years is basically what Jason Aaron's telling us. Now with this guy who kind of shows up here, he's called the High Walker. That's kind of the leader, the Charles Xavier-esque character. That's the only real name we're given for him. He initially tries to use peace and kindness and so on and so forth, but it doesn't really work, right? Instead, like their fear begins to override their senses, and where you end up having this young girl who basically begins to realize this is telepathy that she's she's basically activating and starts to get sort of angry and irritated and pissed off and doesn't really want to leave, it leads to Highwalker basically being exposed for a brief moment, only for him to be killed. And that leads the other mutants jumping in and basically going and, getting into a fight with all the different humans, and all the groups basically, both groups slaughtering each other, to the point that this little girl is the only one left. She's the only one left. But for her, kind of going forward from here, she realizes that she basically has telepathy, right? Now, she doesn't quite know what to call it. She's not really sure what it is. She simply just knows she can communicate with her mind and pick up on the feelings of others. The revelation and the realization of what she has and what she's capable of doesn't really come until some future period, when she basically goes back to the burnt place to kind of sacrifice herself to the vultures, and then in turn is possessed by the Phoenix Force. Now, this is where I'm not really big on this great big huge change. Not necessarily because I'm against change, right? I'm not one of those comic book fans that just doesn't like it when things change. I've been reading for 20 something years. Believe me, I'm aware that comics change. What really kind of baffles me here is it really seems to fly in the face of everything that made the Dark Phoenix saga what it was. The whole idea behind the Dark Phoenix saga in Marvel Comics back in the 80s when Claremont wrote it is it was kind of an answer to the question, what happens if some sort of primordial cosmic entity that's never really known hatred or anger bonds itself to a human being? How does it kind of cope in that situation? Jean Grey basically, really the Phoenix Force becoming Jean Grey, which is revealed at the end of the Dark Phoenix saga. But Jean Grey, being a host for the Phoenix, or however you want to slice it, introduced the Phoenix Force to emotions that it never experienced before, right? Lust, anger, wrath, different things like that. And the Phoenix didn't really know how to handle it. And so it basically went insane. Now, there have been instances in the past where the Phoenix has encountered living beings. In Excalibur Volume 1, issues 42 through 50, I think it was, that kind of introduced the idea of like Necrom and Pharaon and those guys, and how like Necrom basically tricked the Phoenix into like creating all these different pillars and things like that. But the Phoenix wasn't actually bonded to a person. Instead, it was the Phoenix being manipulated into doing a thing. But for the most part, the Phoenix just kind of existed in isolation in space. And so having an instance where the Phoenix bonds itself to a young girl here and then learns all these emotions really kind of begs the question, did the Phoenix forget when it got to the Dark Phoenix saga? A million years of memories, it just kind of forgot what happened, right? I mean, I have a hard time believing that a cosmic entity could forget something, like, golly gee, where'd I put my phone? It doesn't really work that way. I'm by no means railing against this. It's just one of these things where I'm trying to find a way to consolidate and reconcile these two concepts, and there doesn't really seem to be a way to do it. But the idea behind this is that with this girl being possessed by the Phoenix, that initially rage and vengeance are really what overtake her, right? Rage and vengeance against like these baseline humans, right? These normal humans out there that are basically governed by fear. That the human race, because in its earliest days was governed by fear, it would forevermore be governed by fear. And in truth, that's actually an honest way to look at it, right? That despite human sentience and things like that, the most primal basic emotion of humanity is fear. In times of desperation, in times of fear, in times of doubt, people will believe what they want to believe, even if it doesn't make any sense, just because of the fact that it gives them some measure of comfort, right? Humans are always kind of fleeing and trying to find some measure of comfort, regardless of how it may be. But the important thing is that what she sees here in the base level of humanity and kind of looking out into the future of what awaits humanity is, it's always going to be the same thing, right? Like this fear of things they don't understand is going to govern the very nature of humanity from now going forward. As she ponders the idea of just wiping it all away, right? Of literally just wiping out the entirety of the earth, of ending all life on the planet, and then just kind of letting it start over, right? Because that's kind of what the Phoenix Force does. The Phoenix Force gets rid of things that don't work. Why it does that, I don't know. It's an answer Grant Morrison gave us, and it's one that Marvel never bothered to clarify. So that's it. That's the only real response that we get. But the end result of her really ending the entirety of humanity comes by way of one of the wolves, right? Which basically licks her hand. And in that moment, she kind of brings her back to an era of kindness, right? Where these wolves could have killed her. Instead, they took her to raise. And so it's kind of interesting because animals are cool people, or are really cool. Humans suck. Like that's kind of the perspective she gives us. PETA would absolutely love this girl. But the important thing here is that she really kind of backs away, right? She moves away from this concept. And so at some point in the future, we're not really given a definitive time frame that the Phoenix just ages this girl up to basically adulthood, but she ends up traveling directly to Asgard. And one of the funniest things that we get is that you have Odin trying to lift the hammer Mjolnir, which he can't do because this happens after he put the sentient storm inside the hammer. And so the hammer now has a will of its own and just doesn't want to be lifted by Odin. And so where all this is happening, suddenly the Phoenix Force shows up here and starts laying waste to all the forces of the Asgardians. And when it busts into where Odin's at, the Phoenix basically says, you can call me the Phoenix, right? I'm putting a team together to save the world from itself and from people like you and me. Are you in? So this is really kind of how the Phoenix and Odin first met each other, which is really kind of a crazy question, because the thing that I would ask here, this is really the question that I would have to ask. Is Thor really the child of Odin and Gaia, or is Thor the child of Phoenix and Odin? That's my question, because I feel like Jason Aaron's going to change that. And if Thor is actually the child of the Phoenix Force, that would bring in a whole new level of power. It'd be kind of bonkers. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.